Hi and welcome to the MobileCaddy September product update. It's myself, Justin, CEO. I'm also joined by Paul, our CTO, Todd, our mobile Chief Technical Architect, and also Frank, our lead product engineer. As always, we've got a number of updates that we picked out from our releases during this last month. Full details can be found on our developer site, developer.mobilecaddy.net, along with the various release notes as well. So without further ado, we'll move into some of the more notable items that we want to cover. And as has become the pattern now, we're going to start with the documentation updates, because this often covers a number of other updates coming through. So first, I've got something that's probably dear to a few listeners out there, which is activating within Sandbox refreshes. Paul, this is a new document that now covers a particular type of sandbox, if we can cover that.
Yes, Justin. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, this is a very common issue that we come across from our customers. Whenever you refresh a sandbox back from your production environment, if it's not a full sandbox, unfortunately, certain components, not just data but also documents, for example, don't come across to your configuration sandbox. So MobileCaddy, even though some of these components are inside a package, a managed package, they're still removed. Not everybody is aware of that, but that does happen. So the documents vanish. Now we do use those documents under the bonnet. They're used to install MobileCaddy. So customers who have installed and activated MobileCaddy will be used to the page where you put your email address in, and then you go through a multi-step process of next, and it installs various components. Now they're coming through from these documents. Now, as you can imagine, different versions of MobileCaddy have a different set of documents. So what we've done to try and help our customers out here is to provide a set of comprehensive documentation which shows how to go through this process, how to install a separate unmanaged package that we provide, and that will basically bring back in the documents, and then their MobileCaddy installation will be exactly as if they've downloaded it from the App Exchange and installed it afresh, and they can then go through the activation process. So there is a document there, but obviously moving forward, if I can have a quick aside, Justin, on this call, we do plan to have this automated in a better fashion, where the documents will be available by a direct pull call, effectively, to bring components in. So but the document's there, and hopefully that will help our customers overcome these issues.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. Yeah, that's really interesting, and definitely nice to see the roadmap coming forward. I believe not so much roadmap, but pressing release, albeit on the cusp of this month, is there will be an extra check-in just to aid that first activation. Is that correct?
It's an extra belt and braces check. We've got many of our customers are quite technical, and they will actually recognise themselves that these documents or some of the documents are missing, and will endeavour to bring them into their sandbox environment. Now, if they're not all there, the documents, you can get yourself a little twisted around, where you can get halfway through the installation process for those documents, and it will then fail because there is a missing document somewhere along the line, and you've then got a system that's partially present, which is undesirable. We have to then get our hands dirty, Justin, and dive in there and sort it out. So what we have now is a check before anything happens. When they go to activate, a customer goes to activate, we check to make sure that all of the documents necessary are present, and if one is missing, then it won't even go to the first phase, and there'll be a warning displayed.
Yeah, it's excellent. Yeah, just another belt and braces and a bit of paranoia. And I think it's interesting about these two different types of sandboxes, and it is confusing because there is a number, but basically a full copy sandbox will not need any touch done because it's literally a copy of the production environment. But in these partials, there's a few differences, isn't there? And the other difference there, Paul, is that after a partial refresh, the developer will likely have to import their application. So that's a bit timely as we come on to later on talking about exporting import, but that would be then their next step after activating in a partial.
Yeah, absolutely, Justin. Yeah, that all of their data will be cleared away, but we do have the tools there for them to export entire apps or individual versions to go inside an app. And as you said, I think we're coming on to that later. Yeah,
fantastic. Thank you. Looking down on a couple more pieces of documentation, the next one I'd like to cover is around offline relationships. And as we know in the platform, we've got two different types: a lookup or a master detail, where we can, relate different objects to other objects. Todd, this is interesting, particularly in a offline or offline first environment, and we've now got some documentation around both the implementation, but maybe you can give us some a little bit more detail around why and the what's and the how's.
Yes, absolutely. And so, as you say, you have these relationships available on the platform at the moment, and where it gets interesting, I suppose, is a lot of our clients are using MobileCaddy for one of its core features, which is the full network resilient nature, and that's quite tough in itself when you're talking about creating records offline and editing them, etc. It becomes even greater challenge though when you're thinking about creating relationships between different objects where they both might be created offline. So what we actually do is we have this kind of proxy lookup that we automatically create or handle, sorry, I should say, within our synchronization engine that makes sure that when a record gets back to the platform and Salesforce assigns it its ID, so the Salesforce ID that we're all aware of, we're then able to kind of mutually be able to link it back to this proxy field. And that means from a developer's point of view, when they're creating these records offline, or they might have one record that they've created offline and it's linking to a record that hasn't yet been synced, these records can be tied up and the developer doesn't need to do anything apart from think about these IDs being the real Salesforce IDs. It does require a small piece of config on the platform to set up this relationship as we're creating these extra fields. And obviously we don't want to do that by default because it's like kind of efficiencies is one of our core kind of pillars, I suppose. And so the documentation really goes into I think there's like 3 steps of creating these fields and associating the different objects together. But as I said earlier, the reason that we want the app to behave like this is when I'm, as a developer, writing an application and I'm going, okay, I'm now, I don't know, say a child of this parent, so I'm a contact relating to this account, but I've also created my account offline and therefore doesn't have a real Salesforce ID yet. As a developer, I don't want to be concerned about the fact I've got to manage these proxy values, and once it's synchronized, I've got to kind of update my values because I now know it's synced. With MobileCaddy libraries, you don't have to concern yourselves with that at all. We're doing all of that hard work under the covers. And so that document was actually in waiting for quite some time, but it's been launched or released, published in the last week or so, I believe. It should be very useful.
Yeah, thanks, Todd. And that covers the platform configuration, and also it's probably worth noting that there's maybe we'll dig deeper into this in another call, but there's a lot of resilience around the platform side as well in terms of the ordering and the potential failures of that child coming up to the parent, Todd.
Correct. Yes, I mean we don't have we obviously don't have control about which HTTP transactions are going to make it to the platform or back, or the ordering in which a sync might take place, or whether or not a synchronization is in flow already, and at the same point the user's adding a new record in, for example. So we're trying to cover off all the bases there, all the different outcomes that might be in play, and make sure that the developers working with kind of as little concern for all those pieces as possible, but the app actually is working as robustly as it can.
Brilliant. Thanks, Todd. And yeah, just while we've got you on here, I know there's some documentation around again on the developer site around the local assets. Would you mind covering that at the same time here?
Yes, sure, I can do. So this is a kind of strange piece of documentation we didn't really know we'd need to publish. It kind of caught us off guard. We weren't having to do that very much to begin with, and as what we saw with these applications is when you're bundling an image inside an application bundle, when it gets served from Salesforce, it's being served from a static resource, and that reference actually isn't assigned until it's been published, and so it can make life very difficult. So what we've done is come up with a methodology where you can basically refer to it using a variable that gets set at deploy time, and so that documentation is also now in there. It means that if you're serving local images or so bundled images or assets, you can do that without any problems. But it's a strange one to do with serving the app from the static resource.
Really helpful. Yeah, totally understand. And we do get some, I won't say strange behavior or behavior, but just specific behavior to Salesforce in certain instances. And that's part of the reason that MobileCaddy is specific to the Salesforce platform. You get all the goodies, and then you do get some quirks, and they definitely outweigh themselves. But there is a few things that we have to deal with, so it's really good to see. And Paul, we were mentioning that around after activating a partial sandbox, there's some work to do. There's some updates to the export and import processes that are starting to reflect in the documentation. Can you cover the sort of high level as we now see the documentation coming forward for that slightly different or newer process?
Yes, absolutely. Justin, it's something we're just updating the website to reflect this latest documentation as we speak, as we're making this recording. So coming through actually is it's quite a few changes, and the reason that we have changed this are I guess threefold. I think really that there's the first one, the first reason that we've made changes is because customers are now going through producing increasingly larger, more expansive, complex applications, and we need to have an efficiency there around the size of the document that we transport. We move from one org to another, which contains the actual application details and the dynamic version details and so on. The second reason is the efficiency really on import. We used to do a one-shot import, which again, because of size increases, hits governor limits, and we've made some huge efficiency savings around there. So we can put in quite large, massive documents at the moment, and different versions of the application. All of those, although vital, Justin, because we were hitting governor limits all over the place. And finally, the third reason was is to make it more robust, and there is a lot more validation, particularly around the import. So one example of that may be, I don't know, a customer's decided to export a particular dynamic version, and in the export now, you will see, if a customer is listening and they're used to doing this, you're actually exporting applications in particular dynamic versions. They're used to a single file coming out containing the contents, which they then migrate from one org to another. There's now a sister file, a .dig, a digest file, which accompanies it, and it enables us to have a highly compressed version of the actual application file. When that comes across, they'll find they now go through a multi-stage process to import it. It might sound more complex, but it's not really. You kick off a process which does an initial validation in the background, and that will do things like ensure that if it's a single dynamic version going in, that it's going against the correct application. For example, we have had in the past, customers contact us and they've tried to put you know, a dynamic version, they've accidentally put it into a different application. So we'll hit that and stop that happening. And they'll go through this multi-phase. It will go right down and start checking the MobileCaddy components and everything's correct. Just as you'd expect from MobileCaddy, you're used to doing things like checking dynamic version metadata and so on. This is what you'd expect from us. So there are a lot of differences there, Justin. But again, it makes it more robust, more efficient, and huger volumes of data.
Yeah, that's totally understood, and I think that's reflected in the documentation being split into, you know, an export and then the sister import. So it'd be good to see that coming through. And there's a lot of internal tooling around this for the compression, and the digest particularly, as you say, has been given massive efficiencies. I'd like to switch now to the same sort of thing really, which is the Salesforce DX and how we're using that internally, and maybe the effect then after we speak to you, Paul, with Todd on you know, how our tooling can be or is being adapted to allow the use of Salesforce DX. So I understand that, you know, you're on the cutting edge there with you know, using Salesforce DX internally.
Yeah, it's sometimes nice to touch on what we do internally, give a glimpse of what we actually do, because it's not nice for our customers to understand we are using the latest technologies. I mean, up until recently, we've used the old packaging the old packaging mechanism. I suppose it's still current, but prior to Salesforce DX, where we store all of our code. Obviously, it goes into a Git repository on Bitbucket as we go through our versioning for the MobileCaddy package, and we do build that through a series of developer orgs with different namespaces, and you know, and we do various tests along the way. I guess it's how many organisations used to split their work, but there were some drawbacks, Justin. I don't know if you recall from when you were looking, you know, initially at the way we set these orgs up. One is that our namespace, the MobileCaddy 1 namespace, is only actually available in one org. That's the packaging org, which means that as we're building and testing and so on, we have to allow for there being, you know, either a different namespace or no namespace, and there was that problem, that issue. And it also meant that when applications or Todd, as I'm sure we'll come on to shortly when Todd talks, and when he was writing utils, if the namespace is different in the org, we couldn't test it, and there were all of these extra steps and these extra little tweaks and changes that we had to make. So what we've done now is we've split. So instead of using the metadata API package layout, and we've installed Salesforce DX, and there are commands in there that we've used to split the package into the Salesforce DX format, which is now under version control in our Git repository. And now any of us, and it's superb, any of our developers or testers can now very quickly export the latest code, you know, just basically clone that repository and push it straight into a new Scratch org. And that Scratch org, we've got some scripts set up that will be created with the MobileCaddy 1 namespace, and we can do a lot of testing before we go through our formal testing. We can do a lot of our own sort of internal testing against that. And because it's unpackaged, any issues that are produced and bugs that are shown, we get the exact line number. I'm sure that, you know, I know I've worked with Todd, and we've both been very excited actually working through this process together, and seeing these error messages come up, and it's immediately speeded up our development cycle. Further on, we've also produced a Jenkins file, because we've always used Jenkins for our deployment process. So there's a Jenkins file that goes in now. So as soon as we commit to our repository internally, a job fires off, it kicks off our Jenkins process, which incidentally runs in the cloud on Amazon AWS. That process fires up, runs the Jenkins file, and that will create, this is all automated, it will create a Scratch org, push the code in, and it will run some various scripted tests. Now, and what we're doing at the moment is we're quite excited about this and expanding it, Justin. We're writing a large number of tests, and together with the testing team, we've been devising some like large quantity data tests. For example, there are Salesforce DX commands where you can force JSON data, JSON formatted data straight in. So, that'll be the next step, is to intercept that build process with additional automated tests. So it's extremely exciting, and it saves us an awful lot of time. I don't know if Justin, you'd like to involve Todd in this discussion at this point, because he's been involved. I think he's done a little bit of work with the Utils regarding to help with DX.
Yeah, definitely. I think what's interesting, actually, as we pass over to Todd, is that this is really a signal of the maturity of Salesforce as the platform and the tooling around that, and it just sort of dovetails so nicely with the our philosophy, which is it's great to have the build tools. But the other tooling around, so say for example, you mentioned the testing, the easy ability to manage and create the releases. This is really impressive stuff coming through. And Todd, I think you're, as Paul mentioned, then opening the door to the other side, so the client build side, and the changes that DX and the Scratch org may have on that. Do you have some time to cover that and tell us what
Yes.
Utils? Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, sure. So first of all, I'd like to echo Paul's excitement really about DX as a whole. And I think from a developer's point of view and an ISV's point of view, it's really nice to see Salesforce kind of pushing something like this. Whereas I suppose you're not likely to see kind of immediate revenue returns on this. It's all to do with how well we can manage our tools and how well our partners can build their apps and fix bugs, and all of that stuff is really important from my point of view. So yeah, as we started down the road to work on this, Paul and I have been working quite closely, and due to the namespacing, I suppose the opening up of the namespacing whilst you're in the kind of the Scratch environment, we needed to update our developer utils to cater for this, because we could be having any kind of namespace in there, and also fields and objects being created inside that Scratch org were kind of inheriting those. So we had some updates to our utils for that, which is not a major change really for the utils, but something that was needed to be done. But as you were alluding to, I think, Justin, it's really opening the door to being able for us to show our clients how they can start creating their own Scratch orgs off their own setup. So they'd be potentially running more and more testing on their MobileCaddy applications prior to putting it into kind of UAT and getting a much better feel for bottoming out bugs and seeing how far they can stretch the automated testing. So I'm very excited about seeing where we can take this. But at the moment, we're just kind of catering for our own build.
Yeah, fantastic. I think, as we say, just generally around the tooling, all of the pressure that you can put in early just is then repeatable as value going forward at every step, whether it's our own packaging or clients' packaging of an app, and then the slow release through the various orgs, which we've touched on a few times before. But it is the time when there is no time in a project cycle. So these are all fantastic advancements. Around that testing, actually, I'd like to bring Frank in here, because I think this period of the year, there's 3 major releases of Salesforce a year, as I expect everyone is aware. But also it gets quite excitable in the wider environment, in the sense that we've got other things happening to us as well. Frank, can we touch on Winter 18 first, and what you've been up to in the QA team, and all the other things that have happened in the last few weeks since the pre-release orgs and so forth?
Yeah, certainly. So it's been a pretty busy couple of months if you look at the ecosystem that's around us. I think I'll start with our blog post. So if you remember, we've put a blog post up about all of our testing practices. And in a similar fashion with all of these sort of tests that we do, as soon as winter 18 hit, we picked up some issues, which I'll cover in a minute. But it's thanks to that testing, and as soon as winter 18 comes straight out the door, we're on it, testing all of our systems, really thoroughly, going through tons of different configurations to pick up any small issues, and we monitor that constantly as winter 18 progresses. So Salesforce is going to be pushing out patches, pushing out changes, deploying them to sandboxes, and you've got the Gus orgs, and we keep monitoring those. So even if we don't see any issues straight out the straight out the gate, there could be issues further down the line. So it could be a couple of days after the first release, they might bring in another issue. We might get an issue right towards the end, so we never know. So all we can do is keep testing. So what we found in winter 18, again straight out the door, is a sort of repeat of summer 17. So if you remember back to summer 17, we issued an alert about an issue of installing new applications. They would unfortunately fail, and the user would not have a successful install of an app. So we saw this again on winter 17. I don't know if you remember, but back on summer 17, Salesforce patched that quite close to the release of summer 17. So what we've done is we've picked that up straight away, put out some alerts, and started looking at our fixes and timelines and planning everything out. And also we've been in contact with the community and also internal Salesforce specialists who work at Salesforce. But I think if I dive in a bit more to the issue, so when a user would install the application and try to access their app, they get navigated to Visualforce pages. And what was happening in winter 17 is that the system would route us to open basically the Salesforce One app and throw us to different URLs, which unfortunately was causing issues with the SDK and throwing errors and stopping the whole install process. Now we found a couple of workarounds for this already, which we implemented and tested just in case, which was good. And if you were a client who was affected, we monitor your orgs and your instances that you're on, and give you pre-release apps to hopefully overcome this in the interim before the release. So we've pushed those out. But what we've been doing is keeping in contact with Salesforce, monitoring the situation. And as of speaking, it seems like that Salesforce have now released a patch after being in contact with them, which currently is giving us green lights. And we'll be continue testing those. We've got a bunch of configurations to go through, and we'll be keeping in contact with Salesforce on how all that testing is going, and updating all of our clients as we get more information. But it's looking good so far. But yeah, constant monitoring is where we're at.
Yeah, thanks, Frank. That's I mean, it is comprehensive what you've covered there, and it really reflects the time and the effort that we put into pre-release. And that's on those pre-release orgs that come out before the sandboxes refresh, and even after the sandboxes refresh, as Frank's mentioning there, that the patches are going in constantly. So these are daily tests, really to give us all comfort as we come through and our production environments roll over to whatever, in this case, winter 18, that our applications are continuing to run. And we're going to touch on the environment, the wider environment, in a little while. But before we do that, a little change gears back to the platform. One of the things that defines MobileCaddy is our metadata-driven versionable architecture, and that basically means that every application that's built will contain a snapshot of classes and pages and all sorts of things, but they are ground down in the sense that they don't move even if we upgrade our packages, and only when a client or partner wants to enhance or create a new app do those components change. And we have a set of sister components as well, Paul, don't we, which we call MobileCaddy components, and we've done a lot around the client's changing of components, such as upgrading a version, or DV as we call it, dynamic version. Now we've got quite a lot of pressure on us in terms of changing the way we work with our own MobileCaddy components. Do you want to cover this? It's quite a large subject, Paul, but it's very important, isn't it, for the long running applications?
Absolutely, Justin. Yeah, and like you said, it is a very large subject area. So I'll try and whip through it in as much of a nutshell as I can. Yeah, basically our MobileCaddy components, I think, Justin, that they do define individual metadata points, don't they, in our architecture? So, this could be right down to describing a field, and how we would deal with a particular set of Salesforce metadata on a matched, a mobilized field, right up rather to it may be an entire class, such as sync refresh version 4. I might have a MobileCaddy component attached to it, and of course the customer's dynamic version refers to a whole range of these sort of different versions of classes and so on. And I think where you were aiming at, Justin, correct me if I'm wrong, but the general thrust, I think, if your question was around the kind of umbrella version of those things. So if I just maybe contrive an example, a customer might be using sync refresh version 4, which is the first one we use, paging, and they may be using that against something called column set version 3 or 4. I'm just making up the numbers, which may include some of like last month's. We did mention our new standard object support, so we might have case number, for example, as a matched field, and obviously sync 3, the older version, wouldn't be valid necessarily against column set 4 because there's some underlying code dependency. So we have these valid sets of MobileCaddy components, which I think, is that generally where you're headed in your questioning there, Just?
Yeah, that's perfect. So what we're really saying here, isn't it, is that we're going to enhance or update certain key functionality of MobileCaddy itself, and they're aligned to these things called MobileCaddy components. So there is dependencies and compatibilities here, isn't there? As there is in always all of these updates.
Yes, actually, we've got some changes in this package. I'll just, if it's okay with you, Justin, I'll briefly cover this version, this month's set of functionality that we have put in. It's pertinent to this. We used to allow the customer to go to a dynamic version. There was a button for changing a few MobileCaddy components. I think that was the sync refresh class, the column set version. I keep talking about column set version. Basically it's over time, Salesforce increases the number of different field types available. So things like the geolocation came out, and when person accounts came out, we started getting first name, last name, and some subtly different ones, and we have to test those internally and ensure that they fully convert from mobile to platform. And when we're happy, we have a potentially a new MobileCaddy component that goes inside a column set. So that's what I mean when I'm talking about column sets. So customer could change the sync refresh version they're on and their column set that they're on. And I think something the connection session utility, that it's a bit more a lower level. I don't think I need to go into the detail of that, but they could do that from the dynamic version. And a couple of things wrong with that. First, it didn't feel right with our general approach to rigorousness, Justin. We like you said, to nail things down, and we do have a facility there to clone a dynamic version when customers, for example, change the number of mobilized columns or remove a table and so on. So the natural place for that really felt, for this functionality, really felt like it should be in the clone functionality and not on a button that would change the current version. So that button has been removed, and this functionality is now part of the cloning process. So when you hit clone dynamic version, you'll now see an extra MobileCaddy comps change button at the front, radio button. So you can now change them in there. And alluding to what Justin said about the overall combination, valid combination, we used to leave it to our advice to the customer and our documentation, so for customers to understand which components went together. And we are talking about just the 3, but that will expand in time as we make MobileCaddy more flexible. You know, so, and it's not, you know, if a combination can cause errors if it's wrong, we weren't very happy with that. So we've now increased the validation. So we have something that we internally, you know, I don't know what your phrase for it, Justin, is, but I like to say dependency set, that kind of thing. We have a list of valid combinations, and the code now enforces it. So basically, the customer can now not choose an incorrect combination. So we've increased the validation and the protection, and I think the overall feel of this is now in the right place. Would you agree with that, Justin?
Yeah, I think that's perfect. I mean, when you see that in terms of its simplicity now, which is fantastic, and that's the general idea. You know, we'll take the complexity of the matching, ensure the compatibility, ensure the dependencies are raised up correctly, and stop any of those issues at the point of clone, rather than potentially these would have been picked up anyway in the dev cycle, but it's just another point that we can get involved earlier and you know, give some earlier confidence. And I think coming around that, I just want to touch on an internal product that we have, which is called Genesis, which is really around creation of components items within the MobileCaddy package, as well as in the wider container apps and some of our tooling. And the big thrust internally to bring this to bear is really about creating the known dependencies and known compatibility. And that widens out in scope as we look at it, which will be very helpful, quite forceful in some places, but basically to ensure that as all these working parts come together, that's the Salesforce platform and the particular API version of the Salesforce platform, particular package version that we have, the particular components that are available, plus a number of libraries that are built when you're building the app, and the container apps. We're bringing all those together. That's the aim here with this internal product called Genesis, which will do all the dependency checking for us. And really the aim again is about speed and robustness and reliability. So it's a good step, Paul, isn't it, in bringing that first check into the process that makes sense, which is the versioning process.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we have opened the door for Genesis, and we have actually started internally creating versions of the components that are valid, Justin. And the latest version of the package that I was talking about before, we have we have code in there now for doing these overall dependency checks, albeit at the moment we have the values hard coded in the list of available allowable interdependencies are hard coded in there rather than not being in there at all. But the door's open now for a push from what you're talking about, our internal Genesis project, where everything is defined, and there'll be more dependencies, not just the 3 I've spoken about. Justin's alluding to a huge interdependency within the Genesis box between all of these MobileCaddy components, and we will be, Justin's mentioned, pushing those through into the package. I mean, some of them we haven't even mentioned, like, for example, Justin, we have if you look at the utils, for example, Todd's utils, it may well be that, you know, when a call comes in to the package, it might be that specific that version of the utils is only valid for sync refresh versions 4, 5, 6 as we move into the future, for example, and we need to record that. So we've already been in discussions, Todd and myself, about how that version of the utils is stamped inside this package, and obviously it will go inside these Genesis components and enable us to do a fuller validation going forward, and take a lot of work and a lot of strain off us and our customers in thinking about these dependencies.
Yeah, that's a perfect hinge in, actually, because I just wanted to cover with Todd. I think in terms of opening the doors and new enhancements, Todd, around this dependency and compatibility piece, there's been some work on CodeFlow, I believe, to again, not just open the door, but bring in some of this functionality as an initial step?
Yes, that's right. Absolutely. So what we have done at the moment, give some background. At the moment, when you deploy an update to your application code from within CodeFlow, you do that from within the application itself that you're writing. There's a deploy service, which is an Angular service that's part of our starter and our shell applications that you get kind of out the box. So it's a one-click deploy. So what we have done is we've put in some updates to this service and then instructions for including it in existing applications. And what we'll do then is when this deploy process takes place, which is essentially a conversation between the CodeFlow and the platform package, say, right, I'm pushing up a new version of this application, and I want to be targeting this particular mobile app, this particular DV. I'm currently expecting to be running XYZ version of the utility libraries, for example. And so those calls that are going up now with this enriched data will allow the interdependency checking to really kick in and say, oh, right, I can see you're specifying DV8 here, for example, but you actually don't have a DV8, or well, you do have a DV8, but that DV is not set to a developing status. So kind of maybe it's already gone to live. You can't be doing that. So you can put some controls around there. Further on from that kind of validation side, we could be saying, well, actually, the utility libraries that you're telling your app to use are no longer valid for the package version that you might be running. So say we have a new package version come out and the developer hasn't realized this and they're looking to target an older version, we can now enforce that kind of contract, as it were. So hopefully this will reduce some kind of deployments going in that aren't set quite correctly. And on the flip side, we'll also be able to start informing developers that new versions of things are available. So when they go to deploy, we'll be able to say, oh, right, yes, there's a new version of your, I don't know, the MobileCaddy CLI available for you, or there's an updated version of the developer libraries. And then we can kind of link them off to the release notes so they can see what brilliant new features we've got available or fixes and things like that. So it's really starting to, or continuing to round off, I suppose, the deployment process, and then further, like you said, you could be quite hard on these restrictions of version dependencies, but it's all about the compatibility, right? It's making sure that the version you're pushing up is backwards compatible with everything else that you might be working towards, or actually, if you've got newer things being pushed up, are they backwards compatible with the package? So we have a change in there. This is an update to our deploy service, like I said, and we'll be contacting our existing partners about getting those updates in. And in fact, the starter apps, so the shell and the starter apps that we have already contain this new logic in there as well. So if you're building new apps from scratch, you kind of automatically get that update in there.
Oh, that's good news. I wasn't aware that the starter app's been updated. So that's excellent. Yeah, and again, it's about not removing all friction, but it's about looking at any friction that may be needed and bringing it at the point where it reduces all the failure points, and then making that as nice as possible. So it'll be interesting as we step through this. The next step will be, to automate the updating and so on as we go through, and we'll no doubt be covering that in future calls. So yeah, this is really interesting. And one of the things that we were mentioning, all this environmental management and all these other things that just become a pain if they're not dealt with. There is a wider environment that we all work in, as well as the Salesforce platform that we covered with the current Winter 18 release or any of their major releases, which is that our applications work, on the relevant operating systems, so iOS, Android, and Windows 10. Frankly, it's a busy month, isn't it, for updates, and I know there's been some blog posts, but these are around our container apps, these apps that are installable. How are we doing there, Frank? And is there any updates that we should be aware of and what we've tested against, thinking wider into the external environment?
Yeah, if Winter 18 wasn't enough, we got a bunch more updates coming through. So Oreo, the latest Android operating system, Android 8, has been released on the 21st of August. And as you know, we've been testing that all the way from their first developer previews all the way to their last and now their general release. So testing on emulators as we go through and live devices. That's all good, green ticks across the board. And Apple's just announced that iOS 11, its release date is the 19th of September. So that's coming up fast, and their GM image is available, which we'll be installing and testing, just to get a final read on how all that's going. But otherwise, no issues on there. And as I said, we've been testing as each update comes through from Android and Apple. So yeah, all good so far.
Excellent, Frank. And I'll just touch on, because I was actually in a meet with yourself earlier, just the pure quantities of the configuration tests that are done now. So this isn't just a test of, 1 point of logging in or something. As a flavor, Frank, what's the sort of quantity of configurations that we're running against in different user types?
Yeah, it's a massive configuration. So I'll quickly touch on it, but we've got around 10 plus orgs that are set up in a bunch of configurations to test all sorts of things. And we take all those configurations, we take all the operating systems and our container apps, and we run a set of tests through all of those configurations across all of those OSs at any change to test, if anything is broken along the way and what we can do to fix it if there is, or so that we can keep on monitoring it. Our tests end up being in the hundreds of test points, probably even more if you look at the individual things that we're actually testing. So it's really thorough, and it's a great process to see and to do. It takes a lot of weight off your shoulders by seeing all those green ticks. You can be confident that the latest OS or the latest Salesforce release or whatever it is going to run on your device without any issues. So it's a great thing to have, and our testing team is really, really good at keeping on the ball. As soon as a release drops, they're on it, they're testing, they're feeding back to the development team. It's great. It's really, really good.
Yeah, thanks, Frank. I definitely echo that. And there is a blog post recently, actually, which basically listed a number of the tests that we do that can then be used by clients or partners around the we call the initial non-functional tests. So if you're interested in that, take a look at the posts. And some of these tests actually bring up either updates that we should have in, or maybe some fixes. And a lot of those will go at the platform level, but a number of them will go into our libraries and what we call the MC resource library, or the Utils, as can be commonly called. Todd, you've got a couple of items that we wanted to cover just in terms of an update and a fix, I believe, on that particular library.
Yeah, so there's actually one fix in particular I thought would be definitely worth mentioning here, and that's to do with something that's kind of isn't massively used throughout the applications. I believe I only know of one partner who's using it, and this is the availability of an additional field that's supplied onto each record when you read it back. So as a developer, when you do a read from the local store, either through a straight read of all tables or through the kind of a SOCL, we have this dirty flag field that comes back, and this essentially is a Boolean flag that tells us whether or not the record is either newly inserted and hasn't yet been synchronized to the platform, or is one that actually has been updated since the last sync, and the changes haven't been pushed back up. So this is a very useful feature in the libraries. One particular partner is making great use of this in their listing of records to identify which ones haven't been pushed back. So from a user's point of view, they're able to know, okay, right, this record I've got here has got some changes on that haven't yet been pushed to the platform. This other one, yeah, that's exactly as it was on the platform. And they've been using that quite thoroughly in one of their applications. We found out there was a bug in populating that value when using the smart SQL call. So a fix went in for that straight after the report from them, and that's that's out in the next drop of the utils. So I think if you're listening and you're not using the dirty flag or you're not aware of it, then check it out. It's in our developer API. But yeah, definitely a good one to catch, and it goes to show that testing is vitally important for catching these things.
Yeah, thanks, Todd. That's really helpful. While we stay on the utils, we were talking about the different types of environments and the test environments. One big difference, particularly around the URLs and how we migrate around, is around whether an org has my domain set. Frank, there is a difference in the utils required for those. Do you just want to touch on what that means in terms of my domain being on off, and maybe Paul can touch on some of the details of getting that value down, but what that means for us and potentially where we're going with this.
Yeah, no problem. So as you know, Salesforce is a massive thing, and one of these points of configuration is my domain, which you can have on or off in your organization. And what we found is that with it on, there's a different routing experience that your app will go through, and we have things in place to deal with that, so it's not an issue. But what it does mean, unfortunately, that there's two different branches of these utils or MC resources to manage. And if you're on, let's say you're on a my domain org, so you have the my domain version of the utils, if it came to a point where you wanted to upgrade and you didn't know about this, you might end up putting a standard version of those utils in for non my domain orgs, which of course would give you the wrong routing in your app, which is not a good thing. You'd have issues with hard resets or DV upgrades at that point. So what Paul and Todd have done really here, I'll let Paul dig into it a little bit more in a minute, is to automatically deal with this for you, so you don't have to worry about what utils version is in your org. You don't need to worry about the my domain being off or on, which utils to use. So it takes away that chance of you having an error in the routing, and obviously having a stuck device where someone can't upgrade, which is really good, and it's just something else that you don't need to worry about anymore. I don't know if you want to jump in here, Paul, and have a quick chat about what's going on under the covers.
Up to yes, thank you, Frank. Yeah, and so with regards to this, we have a soup. I hope developers are aware of this, called an app soup. Either you, Frank, or Todd might explain shortly how the data is extracted from the app soup when using the utils. But when it's alongside when you obtain data such as the user's name, details about the organization, the whole host of pieces of information that are in there in the app soup, I've now added, or it'll be out actually in the forthcoming release, there'll be an extra flag available to the utils, or even I guess to developers if Todd makes it available from the utils there, to indicate whether or not we're actually on a my domain org. So as well as having the URLs provided inside that app soup, we'll also have an indicator in there, so that the utils code can use that to determine the branch that it then goes down. Does that explain enough, Frank, to regarding this particular issue?
Yeah, I think so. It's really good. It's nice to have one less thing to worry about, eh?
Yeah, it just reduces another dependency. Seems to be an echo on the call here. But yeah, that's what it's all about, isn't it? Getting the friction out and keeping the speed up. So I think we've covered a lot of ground here, and the last thing that I wanted to cover was around the starter app enhancements. And Todd actually has covered that this new deployment service has already been added. So the starter apps give us a quick start in terms of being able to start a project off. They're very useful across the board. They contain a lot of functionality that's pre-built, as well as lots of other tooling. And Todd, this is an area I know there's a significant amount of interest in increasing the scope of these starter apps, as well as us internally increasing some of the sort of the tooling that's pre-built. You've got some interesting updates on there. Could we cover those as we draw into the end of the call?
Yeah, yes, certainly. So, like you said, I think these starter apps provide a very quick way to kind of get off the mark when building the app. So we try to put in there as much as we can to make them as useful as possible. A couple of key features that we've put into the latest releases, as I said earlier, one being that update to the deploy service, which should hopefully help get a decent deploy config set before you roll out. Along with that, we've got the inclusion of some in-app diagnostics now, which is should help if people during development are having any problems, and also see we've got a password protected area for recovery now, which is useful if there's any problems going on. We've got the instructions out, I think, available to bring these into apps that already exist in live, as well as new ones that are being started from scratch.
Yeah, that's great. I've seen the instructions actually coming through. So I think, interestingly, this whole diagnostics area, so as well as the other enhancements, understanding what's happening at the device level, both on the device is really important, which is what we're covering here, and also the visibility back on the platform itself. And anyone who's used MobileCaddy will understand connection sessions, which is this recording of all the interactions, raising of any failures or issues. And because they're standard Salesforce objects, they can be add workflow added to them. But also when you are testing on a physical device, it's really nice to be able to understand, where is that device in terms of, is it connected to the platform? What's the records it's got? Any helpful information raised up really easily. And so it's really good to see these. So we will be pushing hard for anyone who's doing app upgrades, particularly around this new CodeFlow deployment. We'll be able to capture some of this to ensure that these new diagnostic tools and any other new items that are added to make the app either more robust or more easily diagnosable in terms of issues going forward. And that sort of brings me to one point that's slightly off the product update, but we do have a number of customer success calls, which is fairly new for us in terms of a structure. So if you are a current client and you have an application running with us and you haven't had a customer success call yet, so we're doing these on a monthly cadence, covering these releases, these dependencies, plus also just giving some comfort on, potentially the iOS, Android, or Windows container apps you've got and the environment, and any changes that we should all be aware of. Please drop us a line. I'll give the details in a second. But I think that wraps us up in terms of the product update this month. So really appreciate Paul, Todd, and Frank's time and lots of information out as usual. We cover a lot, but if you do have any ideas or requests, either for something we want to cover in the update or features within the product itself, give us a contact on info@mobilecaddy.net or on any of the social channels. And I think with that wraps our month up in terms of the update. Thanks very much.